Okay, so this is my little home video I'm making for the 4013 and the 4514 Hondas that were made between the 90s and between early 1990 and the late 90s. I don't know exactly the production run of the 4514, but the 4013 was only made for 2 years. I wanted to make this short little video because I wanted to explain the differences between the 4013 and the 4514 and the 4518 for that matter too. Now, the whole body style between the 4013 all the way up to the 4518 is the exact same. The only difference is the deck size increases on the 4514 and 4518. You can still get a 38-inch deck on that one, and you probably could on the 4514, but most of those probably had 42-inch decks because they were the upgraded versions of this. The 4013 Honda was the entry-level tractor they made way back in the early 90s, and this is the one that kind of started it all, I guess you could say. And this was about $1,500 brand new. You could get a bagger on it, which is in the shed over there, and a 38-inch deck, and it has a 13 horsepower overhead valve engine that is vertical shaft, and it's a belt drive 5-speed transmission, 5 forward, 1 reverse gear. Now, so as you can see, here's the transmission quadrant and the parking brake. The differences between the 45, actually this open, the differences between the 4013 and 4514 is the 4514 and 18 both have headlights, unlike the 4013 where it just has a black plastic cover there. It has the knockout up here though to support it. The 4514 over here, which is the upgraded version of the 4013, this used to cost I think around $4 to $5 grand brand new with everything. This has a 42-inch deck on it. It has a bagger, but it also has a twin cylinder, hood's a little hard, has an inline 2-cylinder liquid cooled engine that is horizontal shaft. It has a radiator on the front, has headlights on it, and yeah, and the bulbs you can pull right out, are replaceable in here. Now this is the upgraded version. This is a direct drive. There's a prop shaft off the back of that engine that runs under here, kind of like a drive shaft tunnel in a car, a transmission tunnel, and goes back to a hydrostatic transmission back here. This is your quadrant for the 4514, that is hydrostatic drive. You have mowing, speed, transport, reverse, and you still have a parking brake. And what makes this different too is that you have the light switch here, and not only that, but you have a temperature gauge light, which is not there on the 4013. On the 4013, you only have a fuel light and a parking brake light. And there's this little blue stuff all over it because I have to store these under a tarp for right now. I don't have room in my shed for them, but I'll be cleaning that up and putting both of these girls in there. So that's the major difference. This temperature light will come on the 4514, and the warning buzzer down here, which both of these have, will come on for when the thermo switch down here and the bottom of the radiator reaches a certain temperature. I think it's 208 to 216 degrees Fahrenheit. That will close, and this light will come on, and that warning buzzer will come on, and then it's telling you to clean the radiator screen up here. And what also makes this tractor special too is this has the power bagger on it. I'm going to put the deck down so you can get a better idea of how this works. But the power bagger basically is a belt that goes on top of the last pulley over here on the right, oh God, what's that called? Spindle, right? Spindle pulley. And then it wraps around here. This bottom pulley here is spring loaded, or actually it's the top one. Well, it's one of them. You get the gist. And when you turn the blades on, this will spin up and spin this fan in here and produce extra lift up through the bagging system. It's the same exact bagger past this discharge chute on the 4013 and 4514. They are interchangeable, but the discharge chute off the mower deck is what makes the difference. You can get a 42-inch deck with a regular plain discharge chute without the power bagger option, I'm pretty sure, because it doesn't. The one thing I don't like about the power bagger is you only have you have only 2/3 of a cutting deck swath. It doesn't. You have this chunk that's blocked off completely because of the power bagger. And for grass, that's fine. but when you're cutting really heavy duty stuff, maybe heavy grass or heavy leaves, like we do leaf cleanup around my yard, you can see all the trees around here, this will clog easily with this. It might if you drive through it at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but from what I've done, it doesn't really clog. Mainly this sight here is really nice to have. This sight glass in the discharge chute will tell you when airflow has stopped moving, and then you need to clean out the bags. But I am curious to try out this with our cyclone rake one year and see how well this works. Now, as I promised before, I would not only just do a little comparison between these two, I would explain what the main problem, or the Achilles heel, as my father states, is the Achilles heel of the 4013 as compared to the 4514. Mower deck down. Okay, so as you can see here on the 4514, you have your PTO lever, which if you throw that forward, you can see the PTO clutch down here and the return spring. Now the way this clutch works is there's a brake plate in the back. There's a tiny little plate back there. When this lever is thrown forward, it pushes the PTO clutch off the brake plate. And the drive plate, the drive cone, which sits inside here, will engage the clutch. When you bring the clutch back, the brake plate pushes back forward on the top of the friction material and slows the clutch down and stops it from engaging. That's the way it works. Now, I have a spare PTO clutch here. And this just isn't any old PTO clutch. This is the PTO clutch off the 4013 Honda, which is the same exact PTO clutch design on the 4514 right here. Same clutch, just vertically mounted, not horizontally. And so, this is the friction disc, or the drive cone that sits on top of the top half of the PTO clutch. So, and the brake plate is right here. Here's a close-up of the brake plate. You can see the friction material has, where you can see where it's rusted. It used to be shiny there, but this is a really old PTO clutch that is off the 4013, hasn't been on there in years. So that's why it's all rusted up. But same design, same everything. So when you throw that PTO cable on, which is right here, when this goes forward or whatever way it goes, it will really pull this back, and this drive cone will probably be a little bit off from here, not completely, but it will shoot down in there and spin against and create friction between the friction material here and engage the clutch. This outer lip right here is where the brake plate rides. So when you throw the clutch off, this drive disc comes back and the brake plate pushes forward onto this and slows it down. That's the operation of this clutch. It's kind of a reverse clutch if you think about it, but that's the operation of the PTO clutch in the 4514 and 4013. Now the 4518, I'm pretty sure is a similar clutch design. I haven't looked at the diagrams that much, but it's the same clutch as these two pieces, just on a much bigger scale. Like the PTO clutch is bigger than this. I think it has a little bit of a different engagement mechanism, but the 4514 and 4013 share the exact same clutch design. I know that. Now, the 4013 is a good tractor all around. Obviously, it starts up and runs and doesn't miss a beat just like this one. But the only problem with the 4013 is that this PTO clutch is what killed this tractor. This tractor only lasted for 2 years. It was only in production from 91 to 92, I'm pretty sure. At least that's what tractor data says. And you can come under here and you can see that, I'm going to put this hood back so I can see what the heck I'm doing. You can come under here and see you see the deck and the PTO, or the transmission drive belt right here. But I gotta get a better shot of this. Here is the top. Here's the crank, the engine crank. Here's the engine drive pulley that goes to the transmission belt and drives the 5-speed. The problem with the 4013 is when you mount a PTO clutch that is about 3.5 to 4 inches in total in height, including the actuation mechanism that sits on top, underneath this engine drive pulley, there's not enough crankshaft for it. So, and they hold it in there with the same exact 8mm bolt, 8mm threaded bolt. It's a little bit of weird bolt. It's a 14mm head
but it's 8mm threads and 30mm long that goes inside the engine crank. So the problem is that with not enough crankshaft and a bolt that just is not big enough to support the centrifugal force of the and vibrations from the engine and engaging and disengaging the clutch, the threads on the crank will strip out inside there, and the bolt will strip out too. And this is why this tractor failed, because there were so many of these that people would get, and then sooner or later the clutch would strip out. And if what happened like it did on my father, where he turned the blades on and the PTO clutch shot off across the yard because the bolt just dropped out, people were not interested in the tractor. So there was a lot of people who would go by in dealerships and just find these PTO clutches sitting on the ground underneath these tractors. And they'd be like, well, why is that? And then the dealership and the mechanics would tell them that Honda's design flaw with this little 8mm threaded bolt, it will strip out on you on the 4013. Let's see if I can get a close-up on that. I'm using my cell phone right now. Sorry about this. Oh, come on, focus. I'll get a snapshot and put it on there. But now the reason this works on the 4013, or the 4514, is because this whole clutch mechanism is mounted horizontally, not vertically. So all the weight is on the crankshaft, not the bolt. And the other thing is that since this is direct drive, you can see you have the whole crankshaft right here for the PTO clutch. There's no belt drive on this. It's direct drive from back of the engine. So the whole PTO clutch takes up this whole crank, and it sits in there absolutely perfectly. So the two problems with the 4013 was solved. All right, I'm back. One of my parents came out and needed me for a second. So what we got to do here is there's two options to solve this on the, actually there's multiple options on the 4013. Now, thought of a whole bunch of ideas for this over the years of how to fix it, but you could, I know one of the easiest things you could do is just make this PTO clutch set up like it is on a modern day lawn tractor. On modern day lawn tractors, when you throw the PTO lever up there, it's not like it is on these old ones where you have a friction disc cone and a pressure plate like that. It's more so a cheapy way of doing it. On modern lawn tractors, there's idler's pulleys. There's an idler pulley on an arm down there, and the PTO cable runs down on the deck. And when you throw the lever forward, it pulls that arm in and puts pressure on the deck belt coming from the engine and turns the blades on. And the way it works on the engine is basically there's a giant pulley on the bottom it's kind of like a small pulley on top for the engine drive, and then there's a piece of pipe in between the two, and then or a spacer, and then there's the really big one on the bottom, the bigger pulley, and they're welded together, and the whole assembly slides up onto the crank and is bolted in there. And that's the way it works from the factory. So they went away from this design and just went with a stationary pulley that is engaged by an idler pulley, or a deck belt that's engaged by an idler pulley. Now that is an option for this, but do I like it? Really? No, because the only way you'd really make it work is you could either try and tap the hole back out and put this back in there, or just weld the thing on there. But then you would have to go back under the deck, and then you would have to fabricate your own system and reroute the PTO cable down there and figure out how you're going to make the blades engage that way. I don't like that design. Another option is to just come up with your own fabricated design and install a electric PTO clutch, like on a you could get any electric PTO clutch you wanted, as long as it was smaller than this design and it will fit the diameter of the crankshaft and the keyway. That's what matters. You could go to John Deere, Cub Cadet, or anything, but then you'd have to come up with your own fabricated design under here. On the PTO and the engine crank, you need to come up with your own mounting plate for it to work. And then you would also need to find a way of engagement, like a toggle switch or something to send power to it. That's an option. That is an option. And why do I say that's an option? Because not only the 4013, but the 4514 could be upgraded to the same thing, an electric PTO clutch. And the reason I say that is because these clutches are not going to be around forever. If you don't have the money to reline these PTO clutches, which can be expensive where you go, depending on where you live and who you know can do it, upgrading to an electric PTO clutch would be a lot easier to do because the parts are readily available for those. There's so many aftermarket suppliers and so many major manufacturers like John Deere, Cub Cadet, Case, and Troy-Bilt, just to name a few, who use electric PTO clutches. That is a viable option. The other thing you can do is you could figure out a way. The problem is that this bolt, as I stated before, there's not enough, the bolt isn't long enough to reach up to the threads in the crank. Not only that, but there's not enough crank down there for this bolt to go all the way through, to go nice and secure in the bottom of this, like it should. With the bolt not being long enough and there not being enough crankshaft down there for this to screw in there flatly against the bottom of the crankshaft of the engine, because this PTO clutch is so big and so heavy, and all the vibrations and stuff like that will ruin the threads on this and the crank. The third option, which is probably another thing that you could do, is to drill out and tap for a 10mm threaded bolt that is longer than this. Also, you need a fine thread 10mm bolt that is a little bit longer and beefier than this, probably a grade 8, but you definitely want it to be fine thread, not coarse thread like this, because you want as much threads as possible biting into that crank to hold this entire assembly up in there. And that's going to be a chore to do, but it's also kind of reinforced by the Honda 4518. And the reason I say that is because the PTO clutches on the 4013 and 4514 are the exact same, including this 8mm threaded bolt. It is the same exact one on that crank. Now, the difference between the 4514, 4013, and the 4518 is that the 4518's PTO clutch is bigger than this. It's bigger than this, and so is this pressure plate. And to accommodate for that, they actually have, I looked at it on Honda's diagrams and their websites, they have a 10mm threaded bolt by 25mm long. It's the same principle as this, but just bigger. It's 10mm threaded and it's 25mm long. It's beefier than this was to accommodate the more, I guess, the bigger size of an engine. But even still, that's a horizontal shaft engine. That's not a vertical shaft engine like this. So I'm curious as to why they needed to do that. Maybe the engineers just thought, hey, we needed to upgrade the size of the bolt because it's an 18 horsepower engine and it's really big. But I do not know for sure. But still, that kind of just goes to show that they needed to upgrade the bolt size from a little rinky-dink 8mm bolt to 10mm to hold some serious weight. And that's the same thing that has to get done to this tractor. And and the crank has to be tapped out for that. And I'll see if I can get a picture one day of trying to hold this whole entire clutch assembly on here, because I know it's a lot to get the actuation mechanism on here and the pressure plate and the actual PTO clutch itself. It's a lot of work, but I think I can try and get a picture of it one day and to show you just how much of that PTO clutch is just hanging off the bottom of this crank. Anyways, that wraps up my video. I'll start both these tractors up and let you listen to how they sound. I'll do the 4514 first. I also think the combination, I don't know if it's the combination relay or if one of these lights is burned out, but the temperature light and the fuel light do not work, but the parking brake light does. Oh, I get a little throttle. I didn't run this one for long, unlike the 4013. Sounds great. little vibration at idle. It idles low. Something's vibrating on the deck, I think. It's nothing serious. But as soon as you get it off idle, it runs totally fine. So that's the 4514. Now let's take a listen to the old 4013. Surprisingly enough, I've only found one video on YouTube of this tractor running, and it's from like 10 years ago. So this will probably be good for somebody to find on the internet if they find one of these, of what this is supposed to sound like, and like at least somewhat of HD quality. Just put the, gotta fix the hood real quick. One of these plastic bits down here, these little side pieces down here, the left side one's fine, but the right side one, I think there's a clip or something missing, and this sticks out a little bit. So got to make sure you put that in all the way. Just like on the 4514, you turn this on, the fuel light comes on and the parking brake light, and you can hear the electric fuel pump cycling in the back. I think some of the pulleys underneath the under the tractor do the transmission need a little lube, or some of the bearings are shot on them, because they do make some whirring noise to them. But I mean, it's like 20 years old, but you can't complain for that. And I need a new shifter knob. This thing's shotting. We'll rip right off. Put the deck up. This thing runs great. Naturally, we had to modify a little bit these battery cables. The original ones that came on these tractors were circular, like on a car battery. They clamp around the post, but they didn't. We couldn't find any adapters for those. Like on the 4514, the guy we bought it from, he found adapters that you can put on there to go from the circular shape to just a bolt-on like this. We didn't have those adapters way back when, so we just lopped off the battery cables here and made it like a regular tractor. And just like on the 4514 and 18, the 4013 has its own dedicated fuse box and a little 20 amp starter fuse that slides in up here. It needs to be underneath that bolt for maximum effect. It's a little different on the 4514, but it's the same principle. And I had to repair the wire here. That electrical tape job's really shoddy, but I mean, the wire here was split and froze and broke over the winter one year. But that's the only thing wrong. I fixed that, put fresh gas in the tank back here, and hey, it works. So, the thing runs good too. Plenty of power. Doesn't smoke really. When it's cold, you first flip it up to high throttle. We'll put a little smoke out, but nothing serious. So yeah, this 5-speed transmission makes this a lot of fun to drive. It's like driving around one of the 3813s. 3813 had the same GXV 390 engine in it, or 360 I think, that the 4514 did, except instead of having hydrostatic drive like that one, it had a 5-speed on it, just like the 4013. So this thing served the yard well for many years. I just want to fix it up and make it run good like it used to. Just like the 4514, make these things work really well. Yeah, runs really well. As of right now that the brakes are fixed, this is a great tow vehicle for a little garden cart. Had to drill out the hole back here in the plate for our cycling rake for this to mount on here. I'm probably going to swap this one to the back of the 4514 one day when I decide to do leaves with this. But I don't want to use this as a leaf cleanup tractor just yet, because I got to find a place for that bagger. I want to keep that suspended off the ground in our shed, so none of the mouses and stuff put holes in that bag and ruin that. But yeah, no, this is my 4013 and my 4514. We picked the 4514 up a few months ago, and it's a great tractor. It really is. And I'm really happy that ever since we fixed some of the bearings in the PTO. The PTO bearing itself was fine. The only thing that was wrong was the bearing in here, right behind the brake plate, was completely shot. It was so bad that when you turn the blades on, it would just kill the engine right away. That bearing was completely seized, and not only that, it would make a horrible vibration and rattling noise while driving around, like this loud squealing. It sounded like something awful. But as soon as we took the whole PTO off and just stuck the fan back on, tractor ran great. It had no vibrations, no nothing. So I'm happy about that. After just had to get the backing plate here, the back of the actuation mechanism. I don't know exactly what it's called, and we put the whole thing back together, and the PTO works great on this thing. And the power bagger is great for leaf cleanup, and when you have small leaves. We use the cyclone rake for the big leaf cleanup, but like the small stuff, like after all the leaves are off the trees, is great. It's great to use this for because it's so compact. You don't have to run 2 engines and burn up twice the amount of fuel to just pick up the small little stuff. It's a great little tractor. So, yeah, as I said, these are my 2 Hondas. This thing runs great. The only thing I have to complain about is 2 of these lights don't work, but that's immaterial. I always clean that screen off, and I'm very careful with leaf cleanup because that screen will clog up pretty gosh darn quick. 4013 is the project tractor, and I can't wait to finish this up. Hopefully I want to get this done by the summer or springtime, fix that PTO mechanism and use this again. This tractor is in very rough shape when it comes to the paint and everything compared to the 4514. This was kept in the shed all of its life. This was out in the elements and under a tarp sometimes. But so it's kind of a shame to see it like this, but maybe it could be repainted one day like that and restored from the ground up. Parts will be a little hard to find because the 4013 is rare, but I'd still love to do it. And another thing I wanted to comment on too, this goes for all the Honda tractors. It's a shame, but these seats, this seat's completely shot, as you can see. It's got moss and everything growing out of it. I just throw 2 bath towels on it or something like that, or just really old towels nobody uses anymore and ride it around on it so I don't get a wet butt. These seats are no longer available from Honda. They have the same part number. You can find them online and on all the parts lookup for their tractors. They're about $200, same part number, but the seat design is not the same. This is an original seat on a 4514, and this guy even kept it in a shed and used it a lot, as you can tell. And even this seat's cracked up bad. I might as well actually get a seat cover for it. Yeah, sorry I'm back. Sorry for the cuts. We're a little busy around my household today. But as I was saying, the 4514, 4013, and the 4518 all share the same seat. And sadly, Honda does not make the original seat for these tractors anymore. They took the same part number and cheaped out for a aftermarket seat. And it's kind of a shame, really, because the aftermarket seat looks nothing like the originals. It looks like they took the seat off the Cub Cadet 1811 and stuck it on this, which does not look fitting at all. So getting original seats for these is a little hard. Probably the best thing if you wanted to do is keep the frame and just send it off to somebody who can reupholster it. That's probably your best bet. But I mean, this seat over here on the 4013 is completely shot after being outside in the elements for so long. Even under a tarp, that's a great help with the moisture got to it. I mean, the bottom of this seat is just completely shot. And the neutral safety mechanism completely has just been knocked off and gone. It's probably rotted away all those years ago, but it's been bypassed anyway. A long time ago, it broke on my dad, and he just put a paper clip in there and bypassed the thing to get it to drive. So, but I mean, even neutral safeties, you can still buy those for like $80, but it doesn't matter if the seat's shot. So that's something I got to get on this. Besides that, I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and keep up with the project of the 4013, and maybe I'll throw in some updates on the 4514 too, if there's anything I need to get fixed on there.